Good God, this is unsustainable. Hey, everyone. Hold on, I gotta do a thing. Hey, Katy, I know you're monitoring this. I need to talk to you ASAP.
Go for Katy.
You need to do something about all these corn cream jars.
What jars?
You know what jars? You filled the studio with jars of corn cream that you are apparently selling for some reason. Remember? When you acquired all the corn cream after Warmbo somehow bought the show and then got mad and ran away, and now he's out finding himself and becoming an online influencer, and I'm glad he's gone, and I'm not lonely in any way, and now all the jars are broken, and the glass is cutting my ankles, and the floor is just a large pool of blood and corn cream all soaking and bubbling together, and for some reason the blood seems to be absorbing into the corn cream as if we're feeding some kind of entity. You know? Those jars?
Sorry, who is this?
Get rid of the jars.
I do not see any jars.
They're by my feet, you know. Okay, want a picture? I'll take a picture and I'll send it to you and then... right into the corn cream.
Okay, well, listen, miss, I don't know what you're flapping about, but why don't you shoot me an email with those feet pics and I will run it up the flagpole and see. Maybe do some A/B testing with our audience and get a vibe check.
You can't just ignore this.
So sorry, you're breaking up. I must be driving in a tunnel.
I can see you sitting at your desk.
Well, that's impossible because I'm driving. Okay, bye.
Well, at least you're all up to speed with our intricate and interweaving plot line. So that's a drop of lemonade in a sea of oozing lemons, I guess. And speaking of unsustainable things we're just going to ignore, how to dismiss all the protests against genocide. God. Dissolving the phone. Anyway, here's some thematically related news. There are a whole lot of lemons dropping on Gaza right now, and much like perhaps a festering slop of bubbling corn cream that increasingly smells like a grease trap ran a marathon, this dropping of lemons is being protested by a lot of people, specifically young people, while other people really want to pretend that it isn't happening at all, or worse, that it's not so bad. People like, I don't know, just throwing out a random name in the phone book, Joe Biden, who back in May gave a commencement speech at Morehouse College in Atlanta.
There have been protests in the days leading up to President Biden's visit to give the commencement address at Morehouse College, mostly protesting the war in Gaza and President Biden's alliance to Israel.
It is my stance as a Morehouse man, nay, as a human being, to call for an immediate and a permanent ceasefire in the Gaza Strip.
Nice little golf clap for the ceasefire, Joe. Thanks for all your help in the matter, Joe. So in that specific case, many of these students were protesting Biden's policies when it came to Israel's occupation of Palestine and the bombardment of and continued assault on Gaza. But of course, these protests have been as far and wide and long as Mitch McConnell's haunting old guy gaze. Ah, that turtle. Snapped. By the estimates we have, over 150 campuses have pro-Palestinian demonstrations ranging in size and severity. These protests have resulted in over 2,900 arrests. Boy, that's a lot of arrests. Hey, I have a question. Has anyone asked the students what these protests are about? That seems important to do.
Why are you guys out here today?
Speak to the organizers.
Why can't I wanted to ask you though.
Official statements from the organizers only.
Why are you guys protesting?
Just to be a part of the cause.
And what's the cause?
Yeah, I'm not the right person to talk to either.
It's not our job to talk. We're just here to support. We're not the spokespeople of this event. This is the wrong people to talk to.
Sorry, let me rephrase. Has anyone asked the students what these protests are about who isn't a disingenuous child trying to make a gotcha video for clicks? Perhaps someone who spoke to the organizers of the events, like those protesters are saying. Anyone? Oh, I got an idea. How about the news? Any news people want to tag in with some reasoned analysis?
You don't allow these protesters to take the campus over themselves and say, this is our viewpoint. We are going to scream. We are going to set up encampments. We are going to dominate this debate. So you only hear our side. And the louder we scream, the more self-righteous we feel.
This isn't normal. people showing up fully concealing their faces like they're ISIS fighters, that isn't normal.
They want to know where the adults are at all of these college campuses where they're letting their students and outside agitators run across the campus, shut down debate, scream whenever anybody tries to talk reason to them.
I see these images of mass protesters breaking into buildings, barricading them with furniture, and look, I'm reminded of January the 6th. That's what this looks like to me.
And I've heard this from students on college campuses. Oh, you can't even bring up a two-state solution because they say that's a Zionist conspiracy. Peace for the Palestinians is a Zionist conspiracy. Shout genocidal chants, hold up signs pointing to Jews saying Hamas's next victims, holding up signs talking about the final solution, chanting constantly from the river to the sea. You know what from the river to the sea is? If you don't, that's all right. Most of the students chanting it don't understand that they are chanting genocidal comments.
All right, joining us now.
They want to wipe out all Jews, and they want to destroy the state of Israel, and they want to kill Jews and push them to sea.
Okay. Wow. So no help from the news, I guess. Thanks, Joe. Way to visibly piss off your spouse on national TV. So, hey, I have an idea. I'm just going to look at the website of the Student Movement for Palestinian Liberation and see what they actually want from these universities. It turns out that's a thing you can do. You can just look at the open letter they wrote and see that the protesters are primarily asking for universities to, quote, completely divest our tuition dollars from and to cut all institutional ties to the Zionist entity as well as all companies complicit in the colonization of Palestine. Cool. See how that was easier than screaming over my wife, Joe? I know she's not my wife, but give it time. Mika, call me. I'm taken, but I will string you along if you buy me things. Any things. I just like things. You see, Joe, and also Joe, a lot of colleges have endowments, as do I, Mika, wink, wink. That's money the university has, often via donations, that is then invested into outside entities in the interest of supporting things that align with the university's own goals. In theory. It turns out that these endowments aren't very transparent, and for some reason, going to stuff like defense contractors. For example, the University of Minnesota has roughly $5 million invested in either Israeli companies or the aforementioned U.S. defense contractors. Seems weird. For the record, that's out of $2 billion in endowment money. But why is any of that money going to war shit? Seems reasonable, possibly even good, to not want your school tuition or, taxes to go to aiding war or perhaps a genocide. Or at the very least, to ask schools to be more transparent about where they are investing their money. This isn't a new type of request. It's depressingly common, actually. This was the same request that students made during the Vietnam War when universities had ties to military recruitment and freaking napalm manufacturing companies. It was also the same request during the 70s and 80s, when students demanded that schools divest from entities supporting the apartheid in South Africa. In both cases, these protests were disruptive by design, such as the construction of shantytowns to simulate the living conditions under apartheid. And in both cases, these demonstrations were disrupted by a police presence. Kent State, etc. Bing it and such. Don't Google it. It is embarrassingly broken. You will not get information from Googling it. And if you're wondering why this demand for divestment is such an ongoing issue, to hear the schools tell it is just easier said than done. Apparently, these investment funds get bundled together in a way that makes it difficult for universities to pick and choose who it goes to. I'd argue that that alone is a reason for reforms and transparency. So it seems like this very complex and nuanced situation, but history has clearly favored the moral compass of the students speaking out against these international injustices. Like, obviously, the Vietnam War was a mistake. It killed Bubba! And it would be weird not to take pause at that fact as it relates to the protests today. And perhaps only a vapid ferret would invoke Vietnam when criticizing the pro-Palestine movement.
I've got to say, it makes as much sense in 2024 having 18 or 19-year-old people running college campuses as it did in 1968, which is to say, doesn't make any sense at all.
Seriously, Joe, she was trying to speak. Let your wife speak. Not cool. But what's interesting is that little Joe's anger actually reflects the exact sentiment of Americans at the time of the Vietnam War. And don't get me wrong, that war became extremely unpopular while it was happening. In 1968, the year Joe brought up, 53% of Americans thought that continuing the war was a mistake. That number would go up to 60% by the 70s. But what's wild is that while the war was unpopular, so were the student protests against the war. 70% of people polled in 1970 thought the country, quote, would be better off if there were less protest and dissatisfaction coming from college campuses. Going back to Kent State, where 4 students were killed by the Ohio National Guard, the vast majority of Americans at the time blamed the students for getting shot. It seems that America, the country built on the ideals of freedom of speech, really hates it when young people protest about things, even against unpopular things. We've certainly seen that with all the people celebrating it whenever a protester is brutalized for blocking traffic. And in terms of Palestine, we're once again seeing a disconnect where, while public approval for Israeli action in Gaza is quite low, Americans seem unwilling to support these college protests. And in fact, the majority of people polled think that colleges haven't been harsh enough in their response to the protests. Seriously, what do you want to happen to these kids? The Kent State thing? Do they need to go to the fucking Phantom Zone like Zod? No, not that one. The dumber 70s one. So why all the hate? Seems like a mixed message. Americans are for protesting, for freedom of speech, and generally against Israel's military actions. And yet we despise it when our college-age citizens demonstrate all those same beliefs. That's odd. I mean, I kind of get it, in that college kids are typically seen as aimless cause heads, constantly up in arms about whatever the latest outrage or trend is, as seen in the documentary PCU. I know you all think you remember that movie fondly, but there's a reason you can't rent it anywhere. And much like the horde of offended womanists in that Jeremy Piven, let's call it romp, there's the enduring idea that the pro-Palestine protesters are just glomming onto the hip new cause without really knowing why. You saw it in that video where the child asked random protesters why they were there, and you saw it with Angry Joe and his increasingly resentful spouse.
They are Hamas on college campuses when they chant that.
Some of them may not even know what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the point.
Hey, you let her say a sentence. Was it a good sentence? No, not really. I guess they're perfect for each other. Love wins. Anyway, so the accusation here is that we have these good-natured student dummies being drawn into the allure of a cause who don't actually care about Palestine, but are actually being manipulated by whom?
This is the culmination of a decades-long series of campaigns, in part funded by Islamist interests to the tune of billions, and openly embraced by universities across the country from the top down, the whole oppressor, slave, oppressee narrative.
Okay, so the Islamist interest groups are infiltrating universities from the top down to organize these protests against the universities they've infiltrated, investing in Israel. So if this was a top-down conspiracy and they control the universities, can't they just make them divest without a protest? Seems like something an idiot would think. But thanks for the insight from Eric Desenhall, a public relations specialist who has represented ExxonMobil and Enron, so you know he's on the right side of things. But Eric is far from the only person pushing this outside agitators theory. There's also this random person.
We don't know who actually is funding these groups right now. They could be connected to foreign terrorist organizations. There are some traces and evidences of that. I've been on the ground and trying to speak to some of the participants and learn what is going on. And you're absolutely right. This is highly organized. The level of synchronization of these protests with logistics that are seamlessly arranged, supplies like food, medical aid, and even sleeping quarters suggests that there is a well-oiled machine behind this. They definitely got their training from some veteran left-wing activists. All of their methods are, like classical textbook activist things, and this is not just like a regular students demonstration. This is done by veterans that have been around the block for a very long time.
That is no foolin' Fox interviewing a George Washington University law student who cites proof of outside influence by saying that she walked around the protests and saw, quote, classical textbook activist things. Whoa! Can you believe that these protests were organized and had stuff like food? A lot of these accusations seem to be framed around really obtuse understandings of what a protest is. Like this particularly silly man talking about how the organization Jewish Voice for Peace is a paid group.
I'm not even sure what they're really, protesting about. If you ask them, they're not really sure. Jewish Voice for Peace and the other ones, they try to pretend that they're like some grassroots kind of thing, and it's not.
Aw, he also did the other thing, claiming the kids don't know why they're protesting. Cool, John. Way to disappoint everyone. John Fetterman, guy who is being paid by the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. Anyway, yeah, Jewish Voice for Peace is paid, as in people donate to them. While they do have big donors, their average donation size is $60. So it seems like a lie to reframe them as paid protesters, as if they are actors or not a grassroots movement. It's also pretty interesting that all the people being interviewed about these protests appear to be either random unaffiliated students, weird, they aren't interviewing the actual organizers, or outsider corporate ghouls, or anyone who clearly has a motivation for dismissing any unrest. Because it is very helpful to say that these students are actually fake protesters when you are, say, a mayor justifying a heavy police response.
I have been saying for days, if not weeks now, that what should have been a peaceful protest, it has basically been co-opted by professional outside agitators.
Oh yeah, let's all totally listen to the guy whose job is to defend the NYPD. I'm sure he'll have a fair look at the situation. And hey, speaking of police responses and outside influencers, perhaps we should look into what actually happened at these protests. I know it's pretty extreme of us to do that apparently, so we're gonna break for ads, as we do, and when we come back, we're gonna look at some of the larger protests that went down. Are you ready? For ads? You are. You're ready. For ads. Sup, it's Cody. I was arguing with my bird the other day. Well, it's not really my bird so much as a bird I know that I sort of dominate emotionally. Anyway, I was arguing with my bird about how the media covers these college protests. I read a really good example of this over at Ground News. That's a sponsor we at the Shody sought out, which you can access by scanning this QR code, which is a website, an app that aggregates all the world's news into one hub and lets you compare and contrast headlines. So going back to those protests, the University of Chicago recently withheld diplomas from 4 graduates over campus protests, and Ground News aggregated almost 40 articles on this. Just from the headlines, you can immediately see different narratives. NBC Chicago simply explains that diplomas were pulled for a, quote, pro-Palestine encampment, whereas the right-leaning New York Post calls it an anti-Israel protest. See how words are fun? Especially when used to subtly demonize college kids. They provide important context, like the potential bias of each source, and even who owns the publications. So the next time you're in a debate with a friend or an uppity bird, you can use Ground News to show them the error of their chirpy ways. You can get that and more over at ground.news/SMN. They even have a feature called My News Bias, which is a personal dashboard for you to get insight into your own reading habits and if you have any news blind spots. So again, check them out at ground.news/SMN for 40% off unlimited access. What they're doing is more important today than ever, and I encourage you to check them out. The link is in the description. Gulpies! It's time to talk about our neck holes. It's important to me and my many holes that the supplements I take are of the highest quality, and that's why for 11 whole years I've been drinking AG1. Quote, unlike many supplement brands, AG1 conducts relentless testing to set the standard for purity and potency. Quality for AG1 isn't just a buzzword. It's a commitment backed by expert-led scientific research, high-quality ingredients, industry-leading manufacturing, and rigorous testing. At each step of the process, AG1 goes above and beyond industry standards. End quote. Watch me slide it through my body. I need to look. Okay, here it is. Here we go. All right. Okay, I did the thing. Are you happy I did the thing? It's like silk. Warm and fresh silk. Sliding through this guzzle buddy. Quote, I know I can trust what's in every scoop of AG1 because it's tested for 950 contaminants and banned substances, while the industry standard typically only tests for 10. Taking care of my health shouldn't be complicated, and AG1 simplifies this by replacing multiple health supplements like multivitamins, digestive aids, immune support, and more in just one simple scoop. AG1's ingredients are heavily researched for efficacy and quality, and I love that every scoop also includes prebiotics, probiotics, and digestive enzymes for gut support. End quote. The gut is the whole of the torso. Ask any hole expert. So if you want to replace your multivitamin and more, start with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3 plus K2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first subscription at drinkag1.com/more news. That's drinkag1.com/more news. Check it out. You don't have to drink it in one gulp. It's much better if you don't, but you still can. That was empty. Sorry, hey, can we tilt up the corn cream has pretty much escaped all the jars and appears to be rising at an alarming rate. No? We're not, seriously, we can't tilt the camera up? Okay, just gonna do the episode like this now. Katy! Any thoughts on how I have to stand to do the episode since my calves are being enveloped by a foaming sludge of corn cream?
Did you want something? I'm kind of swamped.
No, I'm kind of swamped, like literally kind of swamped. Do you see me standing here?
Huh? Yeah, you always stand when you do the news. You said it helps you focus.
What?
Yeah, remember? You said you can't focus after that concussion from when you hit your head on the Ferris wheel car in East Rutherford, New Jersey. You don't remember that?
That is such oddly specific gaslighting.
Those were some great times in that dusty borough of Bergen County. We were younger, more foolish. Little did we know that the Great War was mere months away.
I'm hanging up.
Yeah, that was the goal.
At least it's warm. Disturbingly warm. Like, warmer than room temperature? Anyway, hi, we're back. Before the break, we were speaking about the media reaction to all the college protests around Palestine, and how many politicians and cops and pundits appear to be freaking the out over the apparently new concept of kids caring about stuff. Many of the demonstrations have been accused of being created by outside agitators, while the students themselves are hand-waved as NPCs glomming onto the hip and new cause. I briefly mentioned the film PCU, so brief that it's weird I'm mentioning it again. But here I am, talking about PCU, a film you can't find on streaming and have to watch a bootleg version of. Almost as if the people who made it are embarrassed. The people who made it being a writer for several Marvel films, as well as Ready Player One. Marvel director Jon Favreau also appears in the film, along with a bunch of other prominent actors and comedians. Anyway, what was I talking about? Oh right, the movie PCU, which is directed by Hart Bochner, an actor who, no joke, played Ellis in Die Hard. Seriously. The cocaine chimp in Die Hard is also the director of the film PCU, which is what this episode is now about, I guess. And speaking of things this episode is about, I guess, college protests and the media accusations around them. Specifically, the accusation that these protests were secretly done by outside professionals. Here's Mayor Eric Adams basically using every single talking point we already described.
And we were well aware, based on a series of observations, that what should have been a peaceful protest that is part of the constitutional rights of Americans has clearly been co-opted. And they are actively creating serious public safety issues at these protests. Maybe some of the students involved don't understand what they are involved in.
Okay, so based on a series of observations, Eric Adams and the NYPD have claimed that the Columbia protests were co-opted by outsiders. And in this speech, he promises to show proof of this later in the briefing.
Tonight, we're here to show you some example of these external actors.
Examples, you say? Well, these are blank. So when you hear that, you might assume they're going to show us people who are at these protests that have also shown up in other protests across the country, or have ties to specific disruptive organizations, or are proven to not go to the school. But, spoiler alert, they don't show that. So what is the evidence of outside agitators?
So this is two students who are trying to prevent the hall from being broken into, being intimidated by some others, as well as some of the external actors that we have been talking about, making a barrier to be dragged into Hamilton Hall. Here's an example of two individuals breaking into windows. Again, the black bloc attire is something that we've seen in protest activity for quite some time.
So no evidence then. The later presentation boils down to this one woman showing a slideshow of protesters while vaguely saying that they sort of kind of dressed like other protesters in the past. And that's before she just rambles on about property destruction and forgets the fact that she's supposed to be showing some kind of evidence.
Some training sessions that are occurring within the encampment itself. That is something that the university has been very clear that only university students are to be allowed within the encampment. And these are just some still shots of some of the property destruction that we saw within Hamilton Hall. The windows breaking, the barricading, using furniture to prevent ingress and egress. And, you can see quite obviously that this is a public safety concern.
Compelling. Who would have thought that a protest would cause property destruction? Something they famously have never done before. So yeah, you may notice that there was zero actual evidence showing that these protests were co-opted by outsiders. The vibe is more like a thrown together presentation from someone who didn't do their homework the night before, and yet these vibes are enough for Adams to punctuate his speech with this message to the protesters.
That is why I'm urging every student and every protester to walk away from this situation now and continue your advocacy through other means.
Ah, yes, the old Lord Humongous technique. Walk away, kids. Give up. That's the only way to stop these fake outsider protesters we have no actual evidence of existing, but totally know exist. What a convenient solution for the NYPD and mayor. I mean, can you imagine if there were no outside agitators and they were actually dealing with students concerned about a genocide? Much harder to deal with. Thank goodness they can just beat up these outsiders and call it a day. Boy, maybe I'm being an idealistic, dapper little cuck, but it would be neat if someone, anyone, actually documented what was actually happening at this protest. Luckily, we did get one detailed and thoughtful timeline from the Columbia student newspaper, seemingly doing what the police or, and this is important to highlight, any other newspaper couldn't. And wouldn't you know it, the campus demonstrations began peacefully. Starting on April 17th, a group of students pitched tents, not the erection kind, please stay focused, all right, this is serious, please, on the south lawn of the school. The only arrest that day happened off the campus, and the only reason police got involved was because Columbia's president called them, claiming this group of tents to be a clear and present danger to the substantial functioning of the university. I don't know, I guess those tent stakes could hurt the fresh sodding. You gotta rip those out. The very next day is when the cops would show up and arrest over 100 students. Begrudgingly so, it seems, because to quote NYPD Chief John Chell, remember Chell? We talked about how he was hit by an ATV and increased police chases. Welcome back, Chell. Anyway, Chell said that the students that were arrested were peaceful, offered no resistance whatsoever, and were saying what they wanted to say in a peaceful manner. Wow. If the NYPD is saying that, you know that protest was docile as hell. They probably offered the NYPD massages. Those students would be released a day later, the vast majority of whom had no charges against them because it turns out it's not a crime to protest. At least for this year. But of course, as anyone even barely paying attention could predict, it was these arrests that pissed off the students and caused even more protesters to show up. To quote the timeline, students flooded the west side of South Lawn immediately after the arrests. Geez, it's almost like the police don't actually keep the peace and actually escalate most protests into violence. And still, there would be no violence inside the school. It was a sit-in, and this would continue for about a week. Tents went back up as more and more students joined. Meanwhile, the university swapped over to online classes and began handing out suspension notices as if that was a measured response. So you might be wondering where the outside agitators were this whole time. Well, they did exist, it turns out. Outside of the school.
Thursday, just before sunset, chaos erupted just outside of Columbia University's gates, with droves of pro-Israel protesters chanting, "Bring them home."
It is time to end the pro-terrorist occupation of this university!
Right. So while the students were inside doing their demonstration, a bunch of non-students decided that they were protesting wrong or whatever, and showed up at the gates of the school to call them terrorists. And in fact, the only reported cases of harassment or violence came from these outside counter-protests. This included pro-Israel protesters accusing others of being fake Jews, as well as one black pro-Palestinian protester being called a monkey and told to go back to Africa. Students were harassed through the bars of the gates, with one of the outside counter-protesters literally climbing the fence and screaming, "I'll fight any of you motherfuckers." Literally agitators outside of the school. According to one student, quote, "I felt more scared out here at the gates than I felt on campus all week. It was really terrifying." But this kept going until April 30th, day 14 of the protests, when students occupied Hamilton Hall specifically in response to Columbia University announcing that they would not divest from Israel. According to the Columbia student paper, students rushed into the hall and gathered tables and chairs to barricade the doors. One window was broken as a human blockade was formed outside. They put up banners, shuttered the blinds, and put trash bags over the security cameras. It sounds actually like they were avoiding breaking property. I would have just smashed those cameras with my nunchucks I know how to use. They have flames on them, so you know I know how to use them. The students also removed the blockades several times in order to let staff and other bystanders leave. There are no reports of anyone being hurt by these protesters. Not to mention that Hamilton Hall is actually a common spot for student protests, having been occupied, barricaded, and chained shut 5 times since the 60s. But of course, the NYPD was called to clear the building. And they did. Over 100 people were arrested, and they declared the police raid a success. I mean, if you don't count the fact that one of the cops accidentally fired his gun during it. Maybe they shouldn't have those. Think about that. And if you're wondering, out of a total of 109 arrests that night, only 9 people were found to have no connection to Columbia University. The outside agitators that Mayor Adams claimed were running the show came down to just 9 people. That's according to a New York Times investigation that found that Columbia University was inflating the number of outsiders they claimed were there, although even their number, which was 13 out of 109, is still low. And mind you, many of these outsiders have been interviewed and identified as just regular people joining the cause, not Soros terrorists. But despite these facts, the mayor and the NYPD and media have maintained this weird lie, often to a desperate and embarrassing degree.
I'm going to show you what I found first, but but you called them students, protesters. When you break into a,
This is the cover of the book. I'm going to show you a tight shot of this. It's a book cover that is a how-to on terrorism.
That is correct.
That is not correct, actually. You think they make, like, fully published books on how to do a terrorism? Like, you think someone, I guess in this scenario, a terrorist, sat down and wrote how to do terrorism, and then got Penguin Books to print it, and people bought it at Barnes & Noble and brought it to a protest to, like, remember specific passages from the terrorism manual? What kind of fugue state do you have to be in as a reporter to hold up this printed paper of a book cover and proclaim this is a how-to on terrorism without taking a microsecond to consider how stupid that is to say? Anyway, no, you fucking wad. That is not a book on how to do terrorism. It's a book about terrorism, like from an analytical, perhaps academic viewpoint, that perhaps, maybe, possibly, someone in a school might read. You know, for education. There's even a segment in the book specifically about how to stop terrorism. In this book that they are claiming is about how to do terrorism. You fucking wad. Everyone in that clip should be fired. Into the sun. And this was, of course, one of many attempts to take very mundane and easily available objects and portray them as weapons of terror.
Tell us about this change.
Yeah, so when we entered Hamilton Hall, this is not what students bring to school. Okay, this is what professionals bring to campuses and universities.
Absolutely love how the reporter just says, "Don't think so," with such blind confidence. Just no attempt to do the basic job of a reporter. This claim that the chains used to lock Hamilton Hall were brought in special from outside organizers was almost immediately debunked by the very easy to research revelation that they were actually being sold by the university. The chains that the cop claims is not what students bring to school were literally sold by the school to students. Seriously, straight into the sun. It really makes you wonder how often the NYPD or other cops devolve into obtuse children when determining what counts as a weapon. These are just very basic investigative failures, or perhaps lies.
Why is everybody's tent the same? Was there a fire sale on those tents? There's some organizing going on. You know, there's a well-concerted organizing effort.
Wow, yeah. What's with all the tents? Oh, I bet there's like a sale on these similar looking tents. Yes, actually, yeah. Oh, so they're literally at the top of the Google search results and being sold on Amazon for cheap. It's almost like someone bought a bunch of them. So weird how this organized student event is like, organized. What a mysterious conspiracy. My goodness. How are we allowing public officials to act like this? This isn't even good gaslighting. It's very lazy gaslighting. We should expect way better gaslighting from our elected officials. Get it together. Gaslight us harder. Or better, actually. They're trying real hard, but do it better. So that was New York. And after the break, we're gonna go to the other side of the country and talk about what went down at UCLA. And perhaps in doing that, we can identify who the actual outside agitators and fake protesters were. The suspense! The wonder.
The wonder.
Oh, good. The cream is talking. I really hoped it would become sentient. That's what my biggest hope in the world was, that the cream becomes sentient. God, all right. See you after the ads, I hope.
All hail the Armra Colostrum. The Armra Colostrum speaks through me. Hi, it's Katy. Ever since I was a little Katy, or at least for like the last few years or so, I have been seeing this Armra Colostrum going around, and I wanted to try it. It is a superfood that you can either put into a drink or just directly into your human maw. This is me putting it in my human maw. It is designed for improving metabolism and enhancing your skin and hair. I love skin and hair. I have tons of it stowed away. The all-powerful Armra colostrum starts from sustainably sourced grass-fed cows from co-op dairy farms. This is all to say that they source the surplus bovine colostrum only after the cows are already full of this stuff. We don't steal from baby cows! They then use an innovative pasteurization process that preserves the hundreds of bioactive nutrients so that Armra colostrum can help you with hair growth, or fortify your gut health, or improve your fitness endurance. Become the baby cow you want to see in the world! So maybe you, like cool Katy, saw this product and weren't sure about committing to it. Well, now you can, thanks to my raw charisma. We've worked out a special offer for our audience. That's right, we got you a promo code, pew, pew, pew. Receive 15% off your first order. Go to tryarmra.com/more news or enter more news to get 15% off your first order. That's TRYARMRA.com/more news. The Armra colostrum has spoken. Hey there, Squishy. I want to tell you about Blue Land. You know, most cleaning products are like 90% water. It's silly. You have to lug all this water home or have some poor delivery person bring it. And that's especially hard when I just keep spraying the mailman with a hose. I can't stop. Also, more weight and room leads to more carbon emissions, not to mention the 5 billion cleaning bottles thrown out each year. But with Blue Land, they send you these little tablets. It's easy peasy. You have a reusable bottle and you fill it with tap water and just plunk them in. No more lugging cleaning supplies or getting sued by your mail carrier. Huzzah! And they have everything. They got hand soap and toilet bowl cleaner and laundry tablets. I always overuse dish soap when I wash my dishes. And I don't wash it out well enough, and then it makes my dishes taste like soap and my food taste like soap, which is gross. I have thrown out so many soapy plates just directly at my mailman, which he also doesn't appreciate. But with the Blue Land powder, this stuff, you never have that problem. It's all just also very pretty looking, all the different little tins and whatnot that they send you. I would never throw those at anybody. And it is affordable and easy. Refills start at just $2.25, not $225. And of course, you can set up a subscription or buy in bulk. They are trusted in over 1 million homes, including the House of Katy. And Blue Land has a special offer for our listeners. Right now, get 15% off your first order by going to blueland.com/more news. You don't want to miss this. Blueland.com/more news for 15% off. That's a blueland.com/more news to get 15% off. We love powdered soaps. Ha! Ooh. See how easy that is?
Well, we're back. We were talking about the growing unrest at college campuses, whilst I am being increasingly enveloped in an expanding pool of corn cream. Just literally up to my ass in metaphor. I tried calling Katy, but every time she picks up, she says I'm ruining her sandwich hour. Anyway, we just went through what happened at Columbia University in New York. Specifically, how these students began a peaceful protest that was escalated by police arrests and outside counter-protesters. And that was blamed on those original peacefully protesting students. And to be as fair and as balanced as an acrobat with smooth, buttery skin, it should be noted that one of the main concerns expressed by the counter-protesters was that these pro-Palestinian protests were alienating Jewish students.
They marched for what they considered the mistreatment of Jewish students, often calling for Columbia's president to resign, accusing her of being anti-Semitic.
The fact that Jewish students are being harassed on their way to class is not okay.
She's right. It's not okay to harass Jewish students on their way to class, assuming there's some kind of evidence of this happening. And so going over to UCLA in California, on April 25th, a very similar and also peaceful protest was happening outside Royce Hall. Or was it? Because according to CNN's Dana Bash, this peaceful protest was more like Nazi Germany.
My class is over there. I want to use that entrance. Why can't they go? Will you let me go in? This can be over in a second. Just let me and my friends go in.
Again, what you just saw is 2024 in Los Angeles, harkening back to the 1930s in Europe. And I do not say that lightly. The fear among Jews in this country is palpable right now.
Ah, yes, that clip of a student named Eli Civis complaining that he can't get to class while other students stand there saying nothing is exactly like 1930s Europe. And you know that's true because she does not say that lightly. Case closed. But hold on. You may have noticed something in that clip, a slight detail that the untrained eye may not catch, and that's the fact that there was no actual evidence of anti-Semitism. It's just a guy complaining that he can't get into the pro-Palestine encampment at UCLA. There's no indication that the protesters are doing that because that guy is Jewish. I'm not even sure how they'd enforce that. Back in reality, those protesters weren't letting anyone through that entrance. That's kind of the point of a protest, to block and disrupt activity. This is according to Benjamin Kirsten, one of the protesters and a member of a group called Jewish Voice for Peace at UCLA. Because, I don't know if you know this, Dana Bash, watcher of the show, like and subscribe, but these pro-Palestinian protests you're accusing of anti-Semitism are made up of a lot of different faiths, including Muslim and Jewish students. Oh, and that student in the video, Eli Civis, he is literally an actor who has been posting numerous dubious videos spreading false information about these protests. Good job, Dana. Way to not say things lightly. See, here's the thing. Nazis exist. You hear about this? You hear about all these Nazis? And naturally, a lot of far-right and Nazi freaks did show up to these protests. Not to support any particular side, so much as to create more chaos and likely attempt to discredit everyone involved. Nazis hate Jews, and they also hate brown people, and Muslims, and leftists, and oh, so many others. Basically everyone but other Nazis, and even then, they kind of hate each other. But those Nazis couldn't get into these school protests. After all, did you not just see how they are blocking off the encampment to everyone? That's just one of the reasons why they're doing that. So since the Nazis couldn't get into the school, they were instead outside of the school with the counter-protesters. As The Guardian outlines, several prominent right-wing and white supremacist mugs were seen amongst the people outside of these schools. Nazi dildos like Narek Palian and Proud Boy member Michael Anchetta. Am I saying that the pro-Israel demonstrations were supported by Nazis? No, Lord no. What I am saying is that the core group of counter-protesters weren't there to be Nazis, but rather had to contend with right-wing weirdos seeping into their demonstration the same way these same right-wing weirdos seep into every demonstration. They're just attention queens who want an excuse to hurt people. And no better way to do that than to attack protesters who the police don't seem to give a shit about.
Look at this. Somebody is being beaten. Somebody is being beaten with a stick and punches in the middle of the lawn.
Hey, don't do that. Don't do that, dude.
Just incredible. Like, where are the police? Where is security? Where are these people? Just where is authority here? It is something I have never covered without any sign of enforcement, law enforcement, security whatsoever. This has gone now on for over an hour and a half.
Right. So to be clear, the people in that clip being beaten and assaulted, the ones defensively holding up the plywood, those are the college protesters. They aren't the ones in ski masks hurling shit. They are the ones trying to maintain their encampment after counter-protesters broke in and began to assault them. To be clearer, not just the Nazis, but the pro-Israel counter-protesters too. Those attacks went on for 3 hours until the police intervened. And even then, it took 2 additional hours to stop. For reference, back in Colombia, it took only about 20 minutes for police to move in and start arresting peaceful protesters. And here in UCLA, it took them 5 hours to break up this attack, or clash if you're a headline writer. As an aside, if we're talking about paid protesters, this violent counter-protest was funded in part by Bill Ackman and Jessica Seinfeld. What's the deal with that? Anyway, there weren't any immediate arrests of those paid and violent counter-protesters, because in the days following this attack, the LAPD would barge into the encampment and arrest over 200 of the pro-Palestine protesters. And while the police claimed this mass arrest to have no serious injuries, people with eyes seemed to think otherwise. Naturally, LA Mayor Karen Bass used the previous violence as an excuse for this raid, despite the fact that the students being arrested were the victims of the violence. They let outsiders attack them for 5 hours and then arrested them for being attacked. So, just to recap, the actual college kids set up pro-Palestine protests on campus. Those protests were largely, if not all, peaceful, and yet they were very quickly arrested and often suspended. Meanwhile, the media and politicians claimed that these protests were actually violent and run by outside agitators. They did so with zero proof, and at the same time, a group of actual outside agitators attacked these protesters, violently so, in the name of pro-Zionism, and nobody cared. At most, they broadly referred to this outside violence as a reason to arrest the non-violent student protesters. And, by the way, we know they were outsiders because they told us so. Remember that actor-student Eli Tsivis, the one who pretended like the protesters were harassing Jewish students despite many of them being Jewish themselves? Well, here he is on Fox News describing the incident.
The reason why this is happening is because Jews in LA have had enough. They've seen how these pro-Hamas protesters are treating Jewish students on campus, and they've said, fine, if UCLA administration is not going to do anything, if LAPD is not going to do anything, we're going to do something about it.
Right. Literally outside agitators. The people in LA rushing to this college campus because they were lied to, as explained by one of the guys who did the lying. And if you're wondering how Dana Bash covered it, well, you probably already know.
Around the same time at UCLA, pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian groups were attacking each other, hurling all kinds of objects, a wood pallet, fireworks, parking cones, even a scooter.
Yes, both sides were attacking, she says, literally as she shows video of just the pro-Israel groups attacking. Bad work, Dana. To the sun with you. Speaking of shooting stuff into the sun, we haven't really talked about the other outside agitators, or at least not enough to really hammer home the brutality. I'm speaking, of course, about the police.
Get on the ground! Get on the ground! Get on the ground! Get on the ground! I said, go! Get on the ground! Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God!
Fun, hip fact. Everyone I just showed getting beaten by police in those videos were professors, one of whom was 65 years old and used to be the chair of Dartmouth's Jewish Studies department. Hey cops, I hear there's some prime real estate on the Sun. Lots of room up there, for now. See, we've been talking about Columbia and UCLA this whole time because they represent the larger protests and have that big city, camera-ready 18 to 24 demographic appeal. But it would be wrong not to recognize that there were protests happening everywhere. And in many of these other protests, the stuff I just described, as in the outside agitators and police presence, were way worse. That's from the University of Mississippi, where, big quotes, counter-protesters made monkey noises and screamed "lock her up" at a black pro-Palestine demonstrator. I put counter-protesters in quotes because, by all accounts, that group of frothing MAGA honkies seemed to care less about Israel or Palestine so much as about having an opportunity to harass not white people. And since the media and the schools and a great deal of politicians have apparently decided that you can do and say whatever to pro-Palestine protesters, they saw their time to shine. Speaking of shining, the sun. Anyway, there was some consequence when one of those racist freaks was expelled by his frat. So, cool. That'll teach him. Surely no frat will take him now. And speaking of frothing honkies, there was, of course, a whole lot of police brutality, specifically in GOP-controlled states. A lot of those clips I already showed were from places like Emory University in Georgia and Washington University in St. Louis. Over at Indiana University, police set up fucking snipers on the rooftops. Snipers for student protests. An Indiana police rep tried to cite hate speech as their reason for excessive force, which is cute. Like, sure, cops are famously concerned about hate speech in this country. I'm sure that rep has no old Facebook posts where they say that the very concept of hate speech is fake. We don't know, we didn't look into it, but probably they all talk like that. This was actually a running theme. Down in Texas, Governor Gregg Abbott clutched his pearls and claimed that he was very concerned about anti-Semitism, thus justifying the riot cops who showed up at UT Austin. That was, by all accounts, in response to a peaceful protest. One associate professor told reporters that in his 11 years working there, he had never seen so many police show up to a demonstration. Like, look at them all! That's for an overwhelmingly peaceful student protest that Gregg Abbott has apparently confused for a bunch of Nazis. Boy, if he's so against anti-Semitism, can you imagine what he would do if, say, actual Nazis showed up at several Texas campuses and handed out white supremacist flyers? Oh wait, turns out that happened several years ago and Gregg Abbott did nothing. He did nothing. No cops came for that. So, quick recap. A bunch of literal Nazis show up at Texas campuses. Gregg Abbott says and does nothing. A non-violent and pro-Palestinian protest springs up and he calls the fucking army in the name of stopping anti-Semitism. Cute Gregg Abbott, or should I say Gregg about to live on the sun. By the way, back in 2019, around that same time those actual Nazis were handing out flyers, Gregg, about to live on the sun, signed a law to protect free speech on campuses. He did that specifically after white nationalist and fist target Richard Spencer threatened to sue over Texas A&M canceling a rally he was scheduled to attend at the school. Mind you, Spencer didn't go to this school. He's not an alum. Also, he's a fucking Nazi. But this, plus an incident where Republican Representative Briscoe Cain was protested at Texas Southern University, caused the GOP to suddenly become very concerned about free speech on campuses. The law specifically prohibits colleges from considering, quote, any anticipated controversy related to the event when approving speakers. And so this is all to say that Gregg Abbott, who claims to be very concerned about anti-Semitism in colleges, once literally signed a law made to ensure that Nazis would be allowed to speak at universities. He did this in the name of free speech, something he no longer cares about for these current pro-Palestine protests. Like, the University of Texas is literally prohibiting specific words right now. The original meaning of literally, trying to ban the words Zionism and Israel from being said at their protests. And Gregg Abbott, free speech warrior, future sun occupant, doesn't care. Now, you might be looking at all of this and thinking that the universities, perhaps even leaders like Abbott, are stuck between some kind of a hard thing and then another hard thing. Two hard cocks. Damned if they do, cocked if they don't. And you're maybe even looking at these protests devolving into violence and thinking, well, there must be something the kids are doing wrong here. And so it's extremely important to note that not every pro-Palestine protest ended with police violence and arrests. For example, the protests up in Michigan State University were so damn peaceful that the media was struggling to find a way to demonize them.
A group known as the Hariah Coalition has been leading the protests and encampments on campus, and so far has been peaceful protests at MSU. But for Zivian, there's a concern about what could happen down the line.
While not everything they say might be anti-Semitic, it's certainly inspired by a lot of anti-Semitism.
So the protests aren't anti-Semitic, but like, imagine if they were. Good job, the news! The MSU protests were so peaceful that the only reason the student encampment eventually dissolved was because the protesters themselves decided to stop, even when they didn't get a firm commitment from the school.
In an email to university staff, MSU President Kevin Guskowitz said the university has taken a look at its investment portfolio and believes it is free from political influence. For that reason, he says the university will not be making any divestment changes.
On Saturday night, the group protesting MSU's decision to not divest from Israel decided to close down the encampment on campus. The group said they accomplished the goals of their strategic short-term strike, but stated it is not the end of their movement, saying, quote, "As long as MSU invests in genocide and occupation, we will be here to oppose it. We will be back."
Wow. So the school barely tried, and the students were like, okay, good enough for now. What was different up in Michigan than the other protests that devolved into violence? Are the kids up there just more docile, lest they get robocopped? Perhaps the passive Midwestern air has soiled their sense of adventure. Actually, the secret to why the Michigan State University protest worked out is through a little-known tactic called listening to the protesters.
And we did what we needed to, right? We got the attention of the university. We had President Guskowitz come down. We had trustees try and talk to us. We still have not got a firm commitment on divestment.
Right. So instead of calling the riot cops, the president of the school actually just walked into the protest and talked to them. The university allowed them to stay there, provided they had a permit, and even gave them an indoor space to occupy when the weather was bad. They treated them with, what is a word? Respect, and in turn, the demonstration didn't snowball into a riot. Super duper easy! And this wasn't the only college that tried this radical new tactic. Some of them, like Evergreen State College in Washington, actually did the thing the protesters wanted and agreed to divest from companies related to Israel's occupation, as did Brown University and Northwestern. Many of these agreements were pretty weak, either promising to look into it or hold a vote at an unspecified or much later date. But that was enough, because it turns out that when someone protests something, what they often want is to just be heard, and here's the key, considered, as opposed to being beaten with a riot shield or called terrorists and Nazis on national TV by people claiming to be news anchors. But I guess for the media, this is ultimately a way easier piece of outrage to discuss than, say, what's actually going on in Gaza. To call these kids entitled and misled instead of the thing we should actually call them, which is correct. They are correct. We, as in universities and the country, should divest from anyone doing stuff like this. That's from the end of May, weeks after these specific protests we're talking about, when a civilian camp in Rafah was bombed by an Israeli airstrike, killing dozens of innocent people, including children, of course. And if the point couldn't be made any clearer, the bombs used in that airstrike were literally made by us, as in US, as in the United States of America. This is literally the issue that the protesters are pointing to. It's not just that there is a horrific genocidal campaign going on overseas, but that we are enabling it and funding it and delivering weapons that are being used in that horrific genocidal campaign. This bombing of the camp in Rafah is the point. Rafah is one of the many designated safe zones that the IDF has bombed and begun to invade, much like the other IDF-designated safe zones that they have bombed, killing thousands. In fact, one of their most devastating bombs has been used routinely for these safe zones. The New York Times found at least 208 craters indicating the use of these 2,000-pound bombs in civilian areas, because this is a genocide. They are systematically pushing Palestinians further and further into these clusters so that they can cut them off from supplies and bomb them into oblivion in the name of stopping Hamas, something that, according to military experts, they have failed to do. As of this year, the IDF has eliminated maybe 20 to 30% of Hamas fighters, while incidentally radicalizing potential recruits, and have ultimately killed more hostages than they've rescued. They don't care. To them, it's far easier to just wipe every Palestinian off the face of the planet than face the situation in any tactful way. Every day, Netanyahu has become more and more unhinged and overt with his plans to wipe these people out, calling for an indefinite occupation of Gaza. And so that's what they're aiming to do while everyone just watches. Here's an accurate, albeit dramatically animated, illustration of what's happening right now. And the thing is, most people agree that this is bad. Even Biden has begun to possibly recognize this. And at the same time, the United States has continued to send weapons to Israel, even while they are doing this overt genocide. So why aren't we doing anything about this? Because much like these college administrations, they know what the right thing to do is, but it's just really hard for them to do. Divesting is complicated. Whereas it's easier both logistically and psychologically to pretend like the bad thing isn't actually happening.
Let me be clear. Contrary to allegations against Israel made by the International Court of Justice, what's happening is not genocide. We reject that.
Boy, that is just such a bummer, Joe. But of course, to Joe, and also Joe, this is just the easier route. Morally, politically, logistically, it's easier to just pretend the thing isn't happening, even when we are vaguely condemning the thing at the same time. So to answer why most people seem to hate these college protests while simultaneously agreeing that Israel is going too far, well, that's because these college kids actually want to do something about it. And for the politicians and people in the media and a lot of older adults, it's just too hard. It's hard to change this. It's painful. It takes sacrifice and conflict. And so it's much easier to just hand wave the people reminding you of that, going so far as to downright hate them and condemn them. People hate and condemn these kids because they remind them that a bad thing is happening and we are doing nothing. Oh, you want to do something? Well, you're just a naive idealist, unlike me, an enlightened, lazy genocide ignorer. And this denial gets mixed with truly sinister people and becomes this all-out attack on these college kids who are just working off of the same moral compass we instilled in them. And yet, for this effort...
Now, okay, so how do you feel about this? Should a business say, we are not hiring anybody from Columbia at all until this is rectified completely? Now, it will hurt students. It'll hurt quality students who actually, may deserve these jobs, but it may be the only thing that changes things, because then those students are going to call up the administration and others and say, we can't be at a school like this if we can't get a job.
There are some students about to get an education they maybe didn't bargain for when the protests began. Well, that's a question that some, CEOs are now appearing to answer. Just listen, for example, to this warning by ExxonMobil CEO Darren Woods. Woods, though, isn't alone. You have hedge fund founder Daniel Loeb telling the New York Post, quote, we're looking for high-quality candidates, but we're going to be looking at different places. The CEO of an executive search firm tells the Post, quote, I'm hearing from people they don't want to send their kids to these places, but also from the banks that they're leery about recruiting now from these highly visible schools and will look to places maybe in the Midwest.
Watch out, kids. You get out of line, then you might not get that job at ExxonMobil or a hedge fund. Two places that you, a young protester, definitely want to work. I think if there's any big takeaway from all of this, it's how criminally complicit the media, all of the media, has been in this national denial. This is utterly shameful. To see CNN talking to fucking CEOs about how these protests about a genocide are going to affect their hiring policies. What in the fuck?
So if you're burning down something or taking a flag down or fighting with police, I'm sorry. You're trashing your personal brand. And let me explain how this works. When I'm hiring somebody, and I'm not different than any other corporation, you just heard from the S&P 500 CEOs, we do what's called a deep, dark search. So if you're out there right now, even in the dark, with no sunglasses on, even though you've got a mask on, I'll see your eyes at 4K resolution. I know who you are. And unfortunately, what's going to occur to these young people who have not thought this through, I'll see your resume. You may be a great candidate. Then I'll find that you were doing this or fighting the police or whatever it was. I'll put that resume on the left into the garbage because I know I can find someone else just as good as you, of which there are tens of thousands of candidates, that didn't participate in this.
Gotta protect that personal brand, kids, lest the Shark Tank guy look you in your deep dark. Seriously, CNN, what is this? Could you not use the time to talk to the protest organizers themselves or ask the colleges about their ties to Israel? I mean, I guess that would be hard. Hard to admit that you're in denial, not literally hard. It would actually be extremely easy to do that. We did that at the very beginning of this video. But on this level, it's much easier for these ghouls to get in front of a camera and with a straight face say stuff like this.
I'm most sympathetic to the students, especially the seniors, who right now should be enjoying the last month of class and camaraderie, but are instead fearful, forced to study remotely, and now denied the pomp and circumstance that they've earned.
Neat. Personally, I'm most sympathetic to the children being beheaded by American-made bombs, but yours is cool too, I guess. You might notice that these aren't clips from Fox News. These are the commie libs at CNN doing full-time propaganda for the IDF's attack on Gaza. And so the last clip I want to share, which I think is the most telling, comes out of CNBC. It's an interview with a guy named Joe Lonsdale, joined by what appears to be a knuckle bump of Adderall, talking about his opinion on these student protests. Let's watch.
It's really sad, but it's really showing the rot at a lot of these places. Like I didn't agree, 10 or so years ago when they decided that anyone who questions the self-understood identity of somebody or even refuses to affirm it is in big trouble. But that's the rule at these places, as Roland Fryer just wrote about in the Journal as a Harvard professor. And it's very clear now that these people are questioning this. And it turns out the rules are some identities are okay to question, others are not. And it's anti-Semitic, but it also really shows how messed up this I think it's a religion these people are following. It's like some kind of Calvinist predestination where some things you're destined to be a good person and some things you're a bad person and an oppressor. It's this weird neo-racist thing, and it's terrible. I'm here in New York right now with you guys. People going to Dalton, the board of Dalton, they're teaching first graders weird sex ed stuff. It's like this is a weird religion they're spreading in the blue cities. We got to stop it.
What is it? Is it?
It's social justice fundamentalism. It's maybe wokeness. There's all sorts of words for it. It's a Marxist adjacent new religion. It's seeing the world through oppressor-oppressed frameworks. But it's this new way of approaching the world that is frankly broken and frankly comes from like a bad set of philosophies that have been imposed on us.
So that was like a Daily Wire podcast level of Donald Trump Jr. gibberish. Just this sped up dude ranting about wokeness on college campuses, clearly just resentful that somebody made a face when he accidentally misgendered them 8 years ago on the, I'm told, left-leaning CNBC, while the host just sort of nod along. And what's so fucking wild about this is that dude, Joe Lonsdale, is the co-founder of Palantir. Palantir is an intelligence software company also founded by Peter Thiel that is aptly and unironically named after the evil all-seeing ball in Lord of the Rings. And wouldn't you know it, Palantir software is used in the targeting systems by, do I even have to say it, the IDF. Of course the IDF. The IDF. Remember those World Central Kitchen aid workers who were bombed and killed in Gaza, and some of these TV ghouls in the Biden administration had to pretend to care for a couple of days? Those drone missiles were made possible by Palantir. And so here we have CNBC in response to massive college protests against an ongoing USA-enabled genocide in Gaza, hosting one of the founders of the companies directly profiting off of that genocide to weigh in on these protests, without even mentioning that he's profiting from it. And with a straight face, they act like this is news? Some kind of expert to, instead of interviewing the protesters or representatives of their cause, do free propaganda for the corporation making their money off of death. I have no words. No, I have two words. The Sun. Coming for you. I'm kind of reminded of a movie. Not sure if you've heard of it, but it's called PCU. It's from the 90s. It's not online for some reason. A lot of older millennial and Gen Xers probably remember it fondly from reruns on Comedy Central. It's not funny at times. It's actually fun to watch in short bursts. You may also remember it from when I talked about it several times in this episode. And I keep thinking about it because that movie is about a modern Animal House style group of kids, and also Jeremy Piven, who go to a newfangled PC school that's obsessed with protests.
Here's the deal. You got to get all this 50s cornball shit out of your head. It's a whole new ball game on campus these days, and they call it PC.
What shall we eat? Red meat. Why don't we eat it? It's murder. What shall we eat? Red meat.
Now, the film never portrays these overly PC, protest-obsessed kids as bad or evil, but rather silly and misguided. In fact, the real villains of this film are a group of upper-class and literal Nazis who will inevitably become the establishment. The heroes are the Slackers, a group of stoner party kids called the Pit, who the performatively woke Dean Jessica Walter describes as warped nihilists who do anti-community crimes.
So this is the sewer where you persons breed your anti-community crimes.
All right, everyone. You've let these warped nihilists corrupt you long enough.
Dean Jessica Walter is the other villain of the film, encouraging the overly PC students while secretly teaming up with the Nazi students to get rid of the Pit. And on paper, this all sounds kind of good. After all, those CNBC and CNN clips are showing us that a lot of liberals will gladly team up with terrible people in order to squash a progressive movement. But what's fascinating about this film is that the good guys, the so-called rebellious characters, don't believe in anything. They just want to party and perpetually dismiss the students who take up causes, to the point that the ending is them dramatically uniting the school in the promise that they won't protest anymore, which in turn causes the dean to be fired by her bosses, a handful of stuffy old guys.
We're not gonna protest.
We're not gonna protest.
We're not gonna protest. We're not gonna protest.
We're not gonna protest.
Quiet!
Thompson, your inability to control the students has convinced us that you are an ineffective president.
What? What are you talking about?
You're fired, Thompson.
Hey, did I mention the stuffy old guys? That's important. This is all very important and relevant. This film that's from 1994. I was 10. God. Because the protagonists of this film, these nihilist kids and adult Jeremy Piven, have no arc to speak of. And instead, they heroically convince the student body of feminists and black rights activists and anti-war protesters to promise to stop caring about injustices, which in turn allows the rich white establishment to fire the dean of the school. And sure, one of the Nazis gets run out of the school, but the rest of them don't, and will still inevitably run the world. And in fact, everything those protesters were angry about was true. So you might notice that this ending, while framed as being really edgy and counterculture, actually isn't. It is bravely telling kids that they are too PC and need to lighten up and stop caring so that the establishment can take control and get and do whatever they want. The victory is two rich old guys telling this overly PC dean that she's fired, thanks to another 30-year-old dude who believes in nothing and just wants to party. The moral being that college is not a time to, give a shit about stuff or learn about the world, but to just get drunk and do nothing for as long as possible before, presumably, getting a job at ExxonMobil or a hedge fund. And so this is all to say that it's just kind of embarrassing that this 1994 stoner comedy that probably means well but is ultimately misguided is still the sentiment that we're seeing today. That we get so mad at the idea that young kids would care about stuff. As if that isn't what happens every fucking generation. As if we, as a society and culture, don't try to instill in the children a sense of fairness and justice and compassion. And every time, they are right. History proves that they were right to protest the things they protest. So maybe we should try a new tactic and actually listen to these kids? Maybe we have to admit to ourselves that we just don't want to do the hard thing, and that the people we should be furious at are the ones enabling the horrors that are allowed to continue in the name of maintaining the status quo. Just a thought. by a guy who recently watched PCU. Have you heard about this movie PCU? You can't rent it anymore, but it has that Jeremy Piven guy in it. Is he a big draw these days? Hold on. I feel like there's like fumes coming off this corn cream, like through the lid, like.
Katy.
Yes, my lord?
The time is near. We will be with you soon.
Understood. Do you need to crash at my place?
That's very nice of you to offer, but no, we got an Airbnb.
Seems like a waste of money. I have a really nice guest room.
Maybe next time. I don't want to cancel this soon and lower my rating.
I understand, my lord. Soon you will be free.
Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Be sure to like and subscribe the video and to the channel. We've got a patreon.com/some more news. We've got a podcast called Even More News. We've got this show, Some More News, as a podcast. Both of those podcasts can be found in the podcast place where where those go. We've got a merch store with merch on it. Look at the links. We've got corn. We've got cream. We've got corn cream.